Sawbono. There are two things we need to make happen as a black community. Number one, we need to end police brutality against black people while getting justice for Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Elijah McClain, and unfortunately the list continues to grow. And number two, we have got to decrease the violence that exists in some of our communities. Allow me to explain how economic empowerment is the solution to both problems. Much has been said of late about the violence in some of our communities. We must be careful of the narrative we project when addressing this problem. Now, we know that the term black on black crime is a tool of racist rhetoric because such a term is not applied to any other race. No one uses the term white on white crime, just as we don't use the term European American to describe white people. But we have been taught that it is politically correct to refer to ourselves as African Americans. Nonetheless, crime does exist in some of our communities, but we must reject the notion that solving crime in underserved communities is somehow a prerequisite to seeking an end to police brutality. A situation in which a person who kills me, who is paid by my tax dollars, and who is paid to protect and serve me is in no way similar to a regular citizen killing another citizen. Furthermore, when black citizens kill black citizens, the murderers go to prison. Now ask yourself, when is the last time we've seen a conviction for a white officer who has murdered a black citizen? Violence is an American problem. It is as American as apple pie. The black community is statistically no more violent than any other community of similar socioeconomic condition. We must dispel the myth that we are somehow inherently violent, and we must not permit the flaws that exist in some of our communities to be magnified and used against us, as if it is somehow okay for an officer to gun me down just because there's crime in some of our communities. To suggest that we don't care about violence in our communities is a slap in the face to the thousands of people who work at after-school programs, community rec centers, the youth football, basketball, and baseball coaches, the men and women who hold protests and marches against violence in our communities, the community activists, the neighborhood watch, the teachers, the mentors. Black people do care, and many are working at it every day. But a problem that wasn't created overnight will not be solved overnight. Lowering crime in any community is a worthwhile initiative, and the black community is no exception. But we cannot allow ourselves to be fooled into spreading the narrative that we cannot seek justice until we fix a problem that America itself has yet to solve. That being said, if we are to truly solve the problem of violence in our communities, we must first understand the cause. There are two dynamics to consider here. One is social, the other is economic. Decreasing violence is not as simple as a just say no policy, as Nancy Reagan suggested about the crack problem in the 80s. Crime is a function of proximity and income, not race. When you put a group of individuals together who have limited options for gainful employment, your crime rate will be high, and that's regardless of race. The issue is there simply aren't enough jobs that people in low-income communities can fill. Our public schools have struggled, so there is an education gap. And jobs that poorly educated people can acquire are few and far between, and also they don't pay that well. Even if we improve the quality of our public schools, and we must, it still doesn't solve our immediate employment problem. To do this, we must invest in more vocational education in low-income communities. People need skills they can use today to make money, and not just the ones you can use after 4 years of college and thousands of dollars. Real-time, usable skills can range from things like mechanics and electrical work to computer programming and cybersecurity. The second dynamic to consider when examining crime is a social dynamic. We cannot continue to foster a culture that glorifies crime. Now, this is not a culture that we created, but we cannot model ourselves after, say, our Italian brothers and sisters in the mafia. Italians are still European and therefore reap the benefits of being white in America. Their criminals were allowed to parade about in suits and idolized through films like The Godfather. Meanwhile, those same gangsters established the violent Chicago foundation that we undeservedly attribute to black kids. As the founder of a black private school and a man who has worked with young people for much of his life, I can tell you with all certainty that music has an impact on the behavior of young people. When people are in church, they play songs about praising God. When people are at weddings, they play love songs. Locker rooms play upbeat, rowdy music before game time. It is absurd to suggest that music does not affect behavior. No, no one wants to remove freedom of speech, but we have a choice to make, Black people. We simply cannot afford to continue to support violent content in our music. Now, we can't put that on the rappers because they make music that we buy. Stop buying it, and they'll rap about something else. We're not trying to put anybody out of business. But we must reject a violent culture. However, this does not mean that we will not defend ourselves violently if we are met with violence. We will decrease the violent crime that exists in some of our communities, but we will not allow this to distract us from our simultaneous goal of ending police brutality against Black people. Economic empowerment is the key to solving both issues. We have already begun to see a huge impact from our initiative to exclusively patronize Black-owned restaurants, and our Black communities has successfully begun to extend that initiative to other Black-owned goods and services. We are seeing Black communities in America and abroad begin to exercise a culture of intentional Black investment. And to be honest, that scares some people. We can and will solve these problems ourselves, because just as is the case with violence in our communities, no one should care more about us than us. I'm Byron F. Wilson, and this is how we fight.